The slap cracked through the ballroom like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every glass froze mid-air. The string quartet in the corner lost their notes one by one until only silence remained, thick and disbelieving, pressing down on 200 guests in their finest clothes. Then, before the echo had even died, a second sound followed. Harder, sharper, deliberate.
Do not touch
Adaeze
her
stepped
again.
forward from the edge of the room, her black uniform still perfectly pressed, her posture straight as iron, and struck Myri Kim across the face with the full, measured force of a woman who had made a decision and would not take it back. The room did not breathe. Myri stumbled. Her champagne glass hit the marble floor and shattered. Her hand flew to her cheek, and her perfectly painted mouth opened in slow, theatrical horror. Guests near the front stepped back instinctively, creating a wide, stunned circle. At the center of it stood a small elderly woman, Park Soonja, 68 years old, mother of the most powerful man in Seoul, pressing her trembling fingers to her own cheek, her silk hanbok slightly disheveled, her eyes glassy with something she had been holding for a very long time. And behind her, Adaeze did not move, did not flinch, did not apologize. Her voice, when it came, was low and final. "Don't touch her again." 3 seconds passed before the security team unfroze. They surged forward, hands reaching for Adaeze's arms, pulling her back with the practiced roughness of men who had spent years protecting things that mattered to their employer. She did not resist. She simply kept her eyes, calm and unwavering, fixed on Myri's face. From across the ballroom, Kong Juno pushed through the crowd. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that had been tailored to the last millimeter. At 35, he had the kind of face that made boardrooms quiet when he walked in. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, the particular stillness of someone who had learned very early that powerful men do not raise their voice. They simply wait. Tonight, that stillness was gone. What happened? He scanned the room, landed on his mother, then on Myri, then on Adaeze pinned between 2 security guards. What did she do? No one spoke immediately. Then Myri's face crumpled beautifully, the way a woman crumbles when she knows the room is watching. "She attacked me," she whispered. "I didn't, I was just talking to your mother and she came out of nowhere and she hit me, Juno. In front of everyone." The murmurs started. Low at first, then building, guests tilting toward each other behind raised hands, eyes moving between Adaeze and the billionaire's fiancée with the hungry curiosity of people who had come for an engagement party and were now getting something far more memorable. Juno looked at Adaeze. His voice was controlled, but barely. "Did you hit her?" Adaeze met his gaze directly. "Yes, sir." The room collectively exhaled. Someone near the back said something in hushed Korean that made the people around them nod. Juno's jaw tightened. "Remove her from this room." And just before the guards led her away, as the noise of the ballroom swelled back to life with scandalized energy, Adaeze looked once more at Soonja, who had not moved, who had not said a single word, who was standing perfectly still with her hands folded in front of her and tears she refused to let fall trembling at the edges of her eyes. The screen cuts to black. Everyone thought she had just destroyed her life. But they didn't see what led to that moment. 6 weeks earlier, the house had been quiet in the way that large, expensive things are often quiet. Not peacefully, but emptily. The kind of silence that lives in rooms with too much furniture and not enough people. The Kong residence sat in the hills above Songbuk-dong, a modernist structure of glass and pale stone that had been featured in 3 architecture magazines and visited by almost no one. Juno worked 16-hour days. His mother lived in the East Wing. They ate together perhaps twice a week, and in those meals, Soonja asked careful questions about his health and his schedule, and Juno gave careful answers, and they both pretended this was enough. Soonja had a heart condition that required monitoring, a mild arthritis that made stairs painful by afternoon, and a loneliness she had spent years learning to make invisible. She was not a woman who complained. She had been raised in a generation that considered complaint a form of weakness, and she carried that belief the way she carried everything, with quiet, unbroken dignity. The agency sent Adaeze on a Thursday morning. She arrived with a single bag, a folder of references, and the particular alertness of someone who pays attention to things other people overlook. She was 29, Nigerian-born, had spent 4 years working in elder care across Seoul after following her older sister to Korea at 23. Her Korean was precise and unhurried. Her manner was warm without being familiar. She shook Soonja's hand with both of hers, looked her in the eye, and said, in perfectly measured formal Korean, "I'm grateful for the opportunity to look after you, madam. I'll do my best to be useful without being a burden." Soonja had studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "Can you cook juk? Rice porridge?" "Yes. My previous employer preferred it with abalone, but I can make any variation you like." "Pumpkin," Soonja said. "My son always forgets pumpkin." "Then I'll make pumpkin," Adaeze said. By the end of the first week, she had mapped the entire rhythm of Soonja's day. She knew that the older woman's right knee was stiffer than the left, so she always walked slightly to her right side when they moved through the house. She knew that Soonja liked the morning news but turned the volume down during political segments because they raised her blood pressure. She knew that she took her medication best when it was placed beside a small cup of barley tea rather than plain water. She knew that the framed photograph on the sitting room windowsill, a young Juno at about 7 years old, gap-toothed and laughing on a beach, was the one Soonja's eyes went to when she thought no one was looking. She knew that the old woman was lonely in a way that had calcified into something that almost looked like peace. Some evenings, after dinner, Soonja would sit in the garden with a cup of tea and talk. Not about anything urgent. About her childhood in Busan. About the restaurant she and her late husband had run for 22 years. About the smell of doenjang jjigae in the early morning. About how Juno used to fall asleep at the counter as a small boy, still holding his chopsticks. Adaeze would listen. Fully. Without looking at her phone, without giving the polite half-attention that most people offer the elderly. She asked questions that showed she had retained everything from the night before. Did the restaurant have a name? Sunji's. After my husband. Was it his idea or yours? Soonja had looked at her, surprised. Mine. He wanted to call it something grand. I said, name it after yourself and put everything you have into it. That's grand enough. Adaeze smiled. That's wisdom. Soonja looked at her for a moment. You remind me of my sister, she said. She died young. But she never wasted a word either. It was not a small thing to say. Adaeze understood that. The bond that formed between them was not dramatic. It built in small deposits, a steadied arm on the stairs, a shared laugh at a television program, the reliable presence of someone who showed up every single morning without fail and asked, genuinely, how you slept. Soonja began to stand slightly straighter when Adaeze was nearby. Not because she needed to perform, but because something in her had decided, without announcing it, that she was safe. Juno noticed, in the limited way that busy men notice the domestic details of their lives, that his mother seemed better, less withdrawn. He thanked Adaeze briefly one evening in passing, the kind of thanks that a person gives to a service rather than to a person, and went back to his phone call. Adaeze accepted it the way she accepted most things in that house, without commentary, without resentment, and with her eyes open. Myri Kim arrived on a Sunday. She came in a white coat, heels striking the stone floor of the entrance hall with the clean confidence of someone who already considered this space hers. She was beautiful in the way that certain women in certain cities are beautiful. Assembled, perfected, the product of considerable effort made to look entirely effortless. Dark hair swept back, skin luminous, smile calibrated to the exact warmth that makes people feel chosen. Juno had met her at a charity gala 7 months earlier. She was the daughter of a real estate developer, educated in Paris, fluent in 3 languages, photographed well at industry events, and entirely comfortable in the world he moved through. His management team had, in the way that powerful men's teams sometimes do, expressed subtle approval. His friends liked her. His calendar app had begun to include her name with regularity. He was, by most measures, in love. Or something close enough to it that he had stopped examining the difference. He introduced her to his mother in the sitting room, with the careful neutrality of a man who wanted two important things to coexist without requiring him to manage the coexistence. "Iamianim," he said. "This is Mairi." Sunja rose from her chair, slowly, with the dignity she always carried. She bowed. She said, "Welcome to our home." Mairi smiled. It was a lovely smile. She bowed in return, the correct depth, the correct duration. She said all the right things. But she did not look at Sunja when she said them. Her eyes moved around the room instead, across the furniture, the shelves, the garden visible through the glass, with the appraising, cataloguing gaze of someone calculating what would stay and what would go. Adaeze, standing at the edge of the room with a tray of tea, saw it. She said nothing. She poured the tea and withdrew. Mairi began visiting the house several times a week after that. Each visit, she was gracious, presentable, engaged. She talked easily with Juno about renovation ideas, about the summer house in Jeju, about the guest list for the engagement party. She was good at conversation. She was good at being present when Juno was in the room. But when he stepped out, to take a call, to check something in his office, the temperature shifted. It was small at first. The kind of small that a person can question themselves about. Sunja had offered to show Mairi a family photo album one afternoon. A quiet gesture of inclusion, the kind a mother makes when she is trying, in her careful way, to open a door. Mairi had glanced at it and said, "Oh, how old-fashioned. You kept physical albums? Most people just have cloud storage now." Sunja had closed the album gently and set it aside. Adaeze, bringing in a plate of cut fruit, had watched the older woman's hands, the way they rested on the cover for just a moment before withdrawing, like someone quietly closing a wound. Another afternoon, Sunja had been in the kitchen helping Adaeze prepare a simple meal. Nothing elaborate. Just something she enjoyed, the ritual of standing at a counter and using her hands. She had been talking, animated, telling a story about a dish she used to cook for Juno's birthday every year. Mairi walked in, saw the setup, and stopped. "Is this hygienic?" she asked. She didn't direct the question at anyone in particular, which made it land everywhere. "Pardon," Adaeze said carefully. "Having untrained people cooking in the kitchen." She glanced at Sunja briefly. "No offense. I just have certain standards about food preparation." The silence that followed was so sharp it had edges. Sunja reached for her cloth, wiped her hands and said quietly, "I'll leave you to it then." She left the kitchen without another word. And Adaeze stood at the counter, holding a wooden spoon, and made herself breathe through the heat that rose in her chest, because she needed this job, and because Sunja had not yet asked her to fight, and because sometimes wisdom looks like restraint even when every part of you is screaming otherwise. She looked at Mairi. Mairi was already checking her phone. If you're already feeling this story, stick with it. It's only getting started. The weeks that followed had the texture of water heating slowly in a pot, the change so gradual it could be ignored, until suddenly it couldn't. Mairi's visits grew longer. Her presence in the house shifted from guest to something that felt more like occupation. She began making suggestions that were not suggestions, reframing them as questions, covering the edges in pleasantness, but landing them with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Don't you think this hallway would look better without all these old frames?" she said to Juno one evening, gesturing at the wall of family photographs that Sunja had arranged over 30 years. Juno glanced at the wall. "My mother put those up." "Of course. I just think the space could breathe a little. We could keep a few. The important ones." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "Actually, maybe we should talk about how we want to use the East Wing going forward. Now that she has help," a glance toward Adaeze standing nearby. "She doesn't really need all that space, does she? We could turn part of it into a proper guest suite." "The East Wing is her home," Juno said, but distractedly, already turning back toward his phone. He did not say it like a man drawing a line. He said it like a man noting a fact before moving on to the next thing. Mairi smiled. Said nothing further. Filed it away. Adaeze set down the fresh towel she was carrying and left the room quietly, And in her mind she was tallying, the way she had been tallying for weeks now, adding this to all the other things she had seen and heard and been forced to absorb with a straight face and a steady walk. The way Mayuri referred to Sunja in conversation as the mother, rather than by name or title. The way she once watched the older woman struggle with the garden step and did not move. The way she redirected Juno's attention every time he and his mother were in easy, comfortable conversation, inserting herself with practiced seamlessness, touching his arm, starting a new topic, drawing his focus the way a current draws a boat without the boat ever noticing it is being drawn. And the way Sunja responded to all of it. Quieter. Smaller. More careful about where she placed herself in her own house, as if she was already doing the preliminary work of taking up less space. It scared Adaeze more than the rudeness did. The rudeness was ugly, but it was visible. The shrinking, that was the part that kept her awake some nights, staring at the ceiling of her small room at the back of the house, thinking about her own grandmother in Enugu, a woman of enormous spirit, and what it would have looked like if someone had been allowed to slowly convince her she was too much. She began staying closer to Sunja during Mayuri's visits. Not obviously. Just near enough. On a Wednesday, 2 weeks before the engagement party, it rained all day. Mayuri had been in the house since morning, supposedly going over party logistics with the event coordinator in the main sitting room. Juno was in the city. The house staff moved around the edges of the day, trying to be invisible. Adaeze was helping Sunja with her afternoon exercises, gentle movements the physiotherapist had prescribed, done in the small sunroom off the east corridor. Sunja was in a good mood. She had slept well, her knee was cooperating, and she was telling Adaeze about a drama she had watched the night before with such vivid detail and commentary that Adaeze found herself laughing genuinely. The second male lead, Sunja said, raising one arm slowly as instructed, always suffers the most. Always. In every drama. He loves her better, he treats her better, but the woman chooses the difficult one. Every time. It's the same in Nigerian films, Adaeze said, gently repositioning the older woman's elbow. The good man finishes last. Always. Human beings, Sunja said gravely, are very foolish. They were both laughing when the door opened. Mayuri stood in the doorway in a cream blouse and tailored trousers, a tablet under her arm, looking at them with an expression that moved through surprise, assessment, and something cooler, too quickly for a less observant person to catch. "Oh," she said. "I didn't realize this room was being used. We do her exercises here in the afternoon," Adaeze said pleasantly. "We'll be finished in about 20 minutes. I actually need this room now." She said it the way people say things when they expect accommodation as a matter of course. The coordinator needs a quieter space and the sitting room has too much echo. Sunja began to lower her arm. "We can. We have 12 minutes left of prescribed exercise," Adaeze said. Her voice was still pleasant. Still steady. "We'll clear out as soon as we're done. The small meeting room near the main office might work in the meantime, if urgency is needed." Mayuri looked at her. A pause that was not quite a pause. More like a recalibration. "I wasn't asking," she said. "I know," Adaeze replied. But Madam's physiotherapy schedule was set by her doctor, and interrupting mid-session causes her joint stiffness. 12 minutes. The silence stretched. Then Mayuri turned and walked out without another word. Sunja let out a breath. She looked at Adaeze with something in her eyes that was half gratitude and half worry. "You shouldn't antagonize her," she said quietly. "I wasn't antagonizing her. I was finishing your exercises." "Adaeze." The older woman's voice dropped. "She's going to marry my son. Whatever you think of her, whatever I think of her, she is going to live in this house. You should be careful." Adaeze looked at her directly. "Are you telling me to let people disrespect you?" Sunja was quiet for a long moment. "I'm telling you," she said finally, "that I have survived worse by being still." "Being still isn't always surviving," Adaeze said softly. "Sometimes it's just disappearing slowly." She said it gently. But she said it. Sunja turned her face toward the rain on the window and did not respond. But she did not tell Adaeze she was wrong either. That evening, after dinner, Mairi found Adaeze alone in the kitchen. She came in without announcement, stood near the island, and watched her work for a moment with the particular patience of a person preparing to say something they have decided on. "You're very attached to her," she said. Adaeze continued washing the dishes. "I care for her. It's my job. It's more than your job." She kept her voice light, conversational, the same tone someone might use asking about the weather. "I've seen the way you operate in this house. You've made yourself very comfortable, very trusted." Adaeze set down a bowl and turned to face her. "Is there something I can help you with, miss?" Mairi stepped closer. "I'm going to be direct with you, because I think you're smart enough to appreciate that. Please. When I marry Juno, things will change. That's natural. I want a household that runs the way I want it to run, with people who understand their role." She paused. "I don't want someone in this house who thinks her loyalty to the mother gives her authority to push back on me." Adaeze held her gaze. "My role is to care for Madam. That's what Mr. Kong hired me to do. And when I'm Mrs. Kong," Mairi said, pleasantly, "who do you work for then?" "A beat. I work for the well-being of the person in my care," Adaeze said. "That doesn't change based on who's in charge of the house." Mairi looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. It did not reach anywhere near her eyes. "You should think carefully," she said, "about the difference between being principled and being unemployed." She left. Adaeze stood at the sink for a long time after, the water running cold over her hands, and she thought about everything she stood to lose. Her income. Her visa status, which was employer-linked. The room in the back of the house where she slept. The small savings she was building. Her sister's wedding she was hoping to attend in Lagos in the spring. She thought about all of it. And then she dried her hands and went to check on Sunja, because that was what she had come here to do. The engagement party announcement came from Juno himself, at breakfast, with the satisfied energy of a man who had just closed a particularly good deal. 3 weeks, he said, smiling at Mairi across the table. "I'll have the team set everything up. 200 guests. Live music. The full thing." Mairi reached across and touched his hand. "Perfect," she said. "I want it to feel like the beginning of something new." Sunja, sitting across from them, lifted her teacup with both hands and looked at the garden. "Of course," she said. "Congratulations." Her voice was perfectly warm, perfectly composed. Not a single crack. Adaeze, refilling the tea from the side table, noticed that Sunja's hands, wrapped around the cup, were trembling very slightly. Not from the cold. The 3 weeks that followed were the worst. The house became a construction site of preparations. Florists, caterers, lighting designers, a woman who did nothing but arrange candles. Mairi was everywhere at once, directing and approving and rejecting, in total command of every decision. She was brilliant at it, actually. The party was going to be stunning. But with every new task she absorbed, she seemed to require more space, more authority, more of the house. She began giving the staff instructions directly, bypassing the existing structure. Small things at first, changing a menu item, rerouting a delivery. But the staff noticed, and they adjusted, and slowly the household began to orient around her instead of around its existing rhythms. Sunja found herself eating meals at irregular times because the kitchen was now perpetually occupied with party planning. She found her usual sitting room rearranged to accommodate linen samples. She found that her gentle inquiries, "Will we have time for family dinner before the party?" were absorbed into the general noise of preparation without ever receiving a real answer. She stopped asking. One afternoon, Adaeze found her in her bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, still and straight, looking at nothing. "Madam." She came and sat beside her. Not too close. Not intrusive. Just present. "I used to run a restaurant," Sunja said finally. 22 years. I managed 40 staff. I managed the accounts, the ordering, the scheduling. She looked down at her hands. I was competent. You still are, Adaeze said. I feel like a guest in my own house. She said it without self-pity, just as an observation. A quiet accounting of facts. Adaeze did not immediately respond. Because what she wanted to say, the full honest thing, was not gentle, and she was still weighing whether gentleness was what this moment needed. Then maybe, she said carefully, you should stop letting yourself be made into one. Sunja looked at her. The house is yours, Adaeze continued. The history of it is yours. Juno, whatever he is now, started as your son, in your arms, in a restaurant in Busan where you worked harder than most people ever will. No one can take that unless you set it down. The older woman was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You're very young to understand so much. I've watched a lot of people get smaller, Adaeze said. I think I've been afraid of it long enough to recognize it. 2 days before the party, it escalated. Myri had been on the phone all afternoon, stressed, snapping at coordinators, the pleasant surface worn thin. By evening she was moving through the house with the controlled intensity of someone whose patience had been used up on other people. Sunja had been walking through the main corridor when Myri came around the corner, distracted, talking into her phone. She stopped when she saw the older woman. Said, with the flatness of someone who had moved past courtesy for the day, Can you use the back corridor? We're setting up in here tomorrow and I need the floors to stay clean. Sunja blinked. This is my house. And in 4 days it's going to be my house too. She said it without breaking stride, phone already back at her ear. She walked past. Sunja stood very still in the middle of the corridor she had walked for 30 years. Adaeze was at the far end. She had heard every word. She walked to the older woman, placed one hand gently under her elbow, and guided her, not toward the back corridor, but straight forward, through the main hall, the way she had every right to go. Don't mind her, Adaeze said quietly. She meant it, Sunja replied. I know. She's not going to change. I know that too. Sunja looked at her. What do we do? And Adaeze had no answer for her then. Not one that felt complete. Because the truth was that she didn't know. She could protect the older woman in the small moments, in the day-to-day. But what happened after the wedding? What happened when she became Mrs. Kong and the house rearranged itself entirely around her will? What happened to Sunja then? She didn't say any of this. She said, Let's get you some tea. And they walked forward together, through the main corridor, because it was theirs. Don't go anywhere. The moment everything breaks open is coming. The night of the engagement party arrived in a blaze of light. The house had been transformed. Warm gold lighting wrapped the exterior, white lilies and orchids lined every surface inside. A string quartet played near the garden entrance, and 200 guests in silk and tailored wool moved through it all with the ease of people for whom beautiful gatherings required no adjustment. Myri was at the center of it, radiant, moving from guest to guest with practiced grace, her hand resting in Juno's arm as they greeted arrivals. She was extraordinary at this. At being looked at making a room feel like it had been arranged around her presence, because in every room she entered, it had. Juno was happy. Genuinely. The loosened tension in his shoulders, the easy way he laughed with old friends, the warmth in his face when he looked at Myri, it was real. He believed in what this evening was. Adaeze worked the periphery. Carrying, arranging, anticipating. Invisible in the way that good staff at wealthy events are invisible, functionally present, humanly absent. She kept her eyes on Sunja, who sat in a chair near the garden window, elegant in her dove-grey hanbok, greeting guests who came to pay respects to her, holding herself beautifully. Holding herself together. At 9:15, the party was at full elevation. Guests were on their second round of drinks. The music had shifted to something warmer. Laughter was everywhere. Myri asked Sunja to come with her. She made it sound like a kindness. I'd love for us to have a moment, just us two, before it gets any louder. She said it in front of Juno and two other guests with such warmth that it was impossible to read as anything but affection. Soonja rose. Because what else does a woman do when the room is watching and the right thing looks exactly like the wrong thing? They went to the east corridor. Adaeze followed at a distance, tray in hand. Habit. Instinct. Something she couldn't name but didn't ignore. She stopped just outside the turn. The voices reached her before she rounded the corner. Mayri's first. Soft, sharp. I need you to understand what tonight means. When Juno and I are married, this house operates differently. I've been patient. I've been very patient, but I need you to stop undermining me in front of the staff. Soonja, quiet. I haven't. You speak to Adaeze in front of them. You ask her to do things. You go around decisions I've made. You make it very clear whose side you're on. She works for me. She works for this house. Mayri's voice dropped lower, more precise. And after the wedding, this house is mine. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to understand your position. A silence. Then Soonja carefully. I am Juno's mother. This house was built with his money. A pause. Not yours. The words sat between them like stones. You should step back, Mayri continued. Gracefully. While it still looks graceful. I'm not a cruel person. I just know what I want and I have never once not gotten it. Soonja's voice, when it came, was barely above a breath. He doesn't know who you are. He knows exactly who I am. He chose me. He chose who you showed him. And then, the sound that Adaeze had been listening for without knowing she was listening, the sound that confirmed everything she had been cataloguing for weeks. The sharp, sudden intake of breath that comes when someone grabs you harder than they should. She came around the corner. Mayri had Soonja's wrist. Not a grip that could be passed off as contact. A grip. The older woman's face was turned away, her body angled as if trying to pull back, and Mayri's jaw was tight. Her composure finally dissolved to its true form. Let go of her, Adaeze said. Mayri looked up. Her eyes went cold. Get out of here. Let go of her arm. I will call security and have you removed from this. Let go. Mayri released the wrist. She turned her full attention to Adaeze with the precise fury of a woman who had never once in her life been challenged by someone she considered beneath her. You have no idea, she said slowly, what I will do to you for this. I know exactly what you'll do, Adaeze said. She took 2 steps forward, placing herself between Mayri and Soonja. You'll go back to that party, and you'll smile, and you'll make me sound like a problem. That's what you do. You make people into problems so you don't have to look at what you are. Mayri's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer. Know your place, she said. She had said it before. She meant it the same way she always meant it. Not as advice, but as a reminder of a hierarchy she expected to be obeyed. And in the silence that followed, something Adaeze had been holding for weeks. The restraint, the calculation, the careful daily choice to absorb and move on and protect through endurance, ran out. Because behind her, she heard Soonja make a sound. A small sound. Not a cry. Not a shout. The sound a person makes when they are hit. Quiet, involuntary, the sound of someone who has learned not to react because reacting has never once helped. She turned. Mayri's palm was still raised. Soonja's hand was at her cheek. The moment held itself. Then the music from the ballroom reached the corridor. Strings, light and bright, entirely indifferent. And Adaeze stepped forward and hit Mayri Kim across the face with every calm, precise, deliberate intention she had been suppressing since the first day she had watched this woman look through Soonja like she was furniture. Don't touch her again. The rest happened fast, and then very slow. Security. Guests. Chaos. Juno's voice. Controlled and dangerous. Being held and led away. Mayri's performance. And it was a performance, Adaeze knew, could see the mechanics of it even from across the room. Precise and calculated and devastatingly effective. She was placed in the staff corridor. A guard at the door. Not rough but firm. She sat on a bench and put her hands in her lap and breathed. She had known, the moment she swung, that she might have ended everything. Her job, her visa, her savings, the spring trip to Lagos. She had known, and she had done it anyway, and she could not locate, anywhere in herself, genuine regret. Only the weight of consequence, which is a different thing entirely. About 20 minutes later, the door opened. Juno Kong walked in. He looked different from the man who had stood in the ballroom. Not smaller, just more present. Like something unnecessary had been removed. He did not sit. He stood near the door and looked at her. "Walk me through it," he said. "There's security footage in the East Corridor," Adaeze said. "Camera above the second sconce on the left. It should show you everything you need." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he left. She sat back and waited. She did not see what happened in the next room. She learned it later in pieces, from the kitchen staff who had watched through various doorways. Juno had pulled the footage on his phone in under 5 minutes. He had watched it twice. Then he had walked back into the party, past the quartet, past the guests, through the wide golden light of an engagement party that was already dismantling itself in everyone's awareness. And he had found Myri near the bar, managing the aftermath of her injury with practiced grace, surrounded by concerned friends. He did not raise his voice. He simply said quietly, so that only she could hear, "You hit my mother." She had begun to explain. Context, misunderstanding, provocation, and he had said it again. "You hit my mother." And something in the way he said it the second time closed every door she might have opened. The engagement was over before the night was. Adaeze was still in the corridor when he came back. She stood as he entered, because she had been raised to stand, and because whatever came next deserved to be received upright. "You can go," he said. "You're not being removed." She waited, because there was clearly more. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the floor, and she saw him doing the particular private accounting that people do when they realize they have been absent from something that needed them. "I wasn't watching," he said finally. It wasn't an accusation toward her. It was just the truth, offered plainly. "No," she agreed. "My mother. I thought she seemed fine." She seemed. "She learned to seem fine a long time ago," Adaeze said gently. "She's very good at it." He looked up. His eyes were not soft exactly, but they were open. "Why didn't you come to me?" "I thought about it," she said honestly. "I decided you would need to see it for yourself. You could have lost everything tonight." "I know." He held her gaze. And then he said, without decoration, without making it more than it was, "You protected my mother when I wasn't there. I don't know how to repay that." "You don't need to repay it," she said. "Just be there now." The house settled into itself over the days that followed. Quiet again, but differently. Not the empty quiet of before. Something warmer. Sunja found Adaeze in the garden the morning after, the air still carrying the ghost of the previous night's flowers, and she sat beside her on the stone bench without preamble. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sunja said. "About disappearing slowly." Adaeze waited. "I don't want to disappear," the older woman said. "I think I forgot for a while that I didn't have to." Adaeze looked at her. "You never had to." Sunja reached over and placed her hand over Adaeze, briefly. The gesture of a woman who did not make gestures lightly. "She gave me the courage I didn't have," she would tell Juno later. Simple as that. The closing image stayed with the people who told this story for a long time after. An elderly Korean woman and a young Nigerian woman walking slowly through a sunlit garden, the older one's hand resting lightly on the younger one's arm. Not for support, exactly, but for the particular comfort of knowing someone is walking beside you who sees you fully, and will not let you become invisible. The house was quiet around them. Finally, the right kind of quiet. If this story moved you, hit the like button below. It genuinely helps more people find it. Drop a comment and let us know. At which moment did you realize Adaeze was going to snap? Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. New ones drop every week.